This is hard-boiled. Not the type of egg, it's a film. It's been praised for bringing Hong Kong cinema across the ocean to America, and it was the first time that Western audiences were exposed to the director John Woo's signature style, i.e. having characters flip through the air firing two pistols and having an almost artistic level of debris flying at the screen. Flash forward to today, and the Hong Kong Massacre attempts to recapture that same sense of energy and wonder that people felt nearly 30 years ago. Does it succeed? Well, only one way to find out. Hong Kong Massacre was developed by Vresky Studios, although referring to Vresky as a studio might be a little disingenuous. It's really just two guys who appear to have only worked on Hong Kong Massacre, and it shows in a lot of ways. Now, if I haven't made it abundantly clear, HKM owes a lot of its visual influence to John Woo, but it will likely be compared more commonly with a similar game that you might have heard of. And it's easy to see why. Both are top-down shooters with a variety of guns, twitch shooting, and quick deaths. But more importantly than how these two games are similar is actually how they differ. For example, the visual style of Hotline Miami is more akin to something called synthwave, featuring bright lens flares, gaudy hues of purple and pink that seem to accent nearly every surface of a level. HKM, on the other hand, is a lot more grounded and instead chooses to lean more heavily on red neon that honestly feels oppressive throughout most of the game. You're definitely going to be having Virtual Boy flashbacks while navigating HKM's UI. Another important difference between both games is their soundtracks. Now, while Hotline Miami had a truly unique soundtrack for its time, featuring artists like Moon, Perturbator, and El Cuervo, HKM's ends up feeling a lot blander by comparison. And this isn't to say that HKM's music is bad or that it's ill-fitting, but when you're compared to a game that literally popularized an entire genre of music, mediocre just doesn't cut it. Now, before I dedicate this entire review just to comparing HKM to Hotline Miami, let's start by actually talking about HKM and its gameplay. The tutorial is essentially just two on-screen prompts that indicate the game's controls. It's the equivalent of having a guy complete a written test and then shipping him off to war. You'll start each level by selecting one of four weapons, although you only start with a pistol unlocked at first. You do unlock other guns like rifles or SMGs through completing side objectives though. Now, depending on what gun you pick, some weapons will actually offer a higher capacity or range or grant improved mobility. Honestly though, I never really felt as though there was a benefit for using a rifle over a pistol since they both killed in one shot and seem to have the same level of accuracy. This seems like a real missed opportunity because without the desire to unlock more weapons, there's not a lot of progress to make in the game apart from finishing all the levels. Now, to complete a level, you'll be tasked with clearing out room after room of random goons. You'll make use of two abilities to dodge enemy attacks, the first being slow motion and the second being a slide. Now, slow motion works as you might expect. Time crawls and you have this superhuman ability to dodge bullets and dispatch with tons of enemies as you see fit. The meter for the slow motion is incredibly generous as well, to the point that you may as well not have a meter at all. For example, you can freeze time for nearly 10 seconds, and even if you do happen to run out of meter, it replenishes itself within moments. Of course, using slow motion is your choice, but it does feel as though the game was balanced around this ability, which is to say that it's incredibly easy. Of course, there will be moments where you die in HKM, but it's more due to the fact that enemies tend to blend in with their environment. To better explain what I mean by this though, we'll first need to talk about the game's visuals. From a purely aesthetic standpoint, HKM is really a marvel to look at, especially when you consider that only two guys made this game. Shotgun blasts expand into huge plumes of smoke after firing, debris and blood fills the screen during shootouts, and slow motion really just adds to these effects. So, you might be asking, what's the problem? Well, if this was a film and not a video game, there really wouldn't be one, but as a video game it can be extremely frustrating trying to tell the difference between a spark and a bullet since they both appear nearly identical when they're flying at you. And this isn't an isolated issue either, it's also difficult to know how a piece of the environment will react to bullets. For example, if we look at this car, we might assume that we can't shoot over it, which we can't. Unless we shoot over the hood, that is. The first time I encountered this car, this wasn't really readily apparent to me, so I got blasted by a shotgun since I assumed it would hit the side of the car. Now in retrospect, this is pretty realistic, but from a top-down perspective, this can be really confusing visually. And in a game where a single bullet can cause you to have to replay the entire level, having a confusing visual language can really annihilate any feeling of fairness that your game has. Confusing visuals aren't just contained to cars either. As I mentioned before, once the screen is filled with enough debris, it becomes incredibly busy and nearly impossible to tell what's what. Now again, I find this game incredibly impressive visually, but I'm trying to play a video game here, not watch a movie. Wait, am I trying to watch a movie? Speaking of movies, you might be wondering what the plot of this game is, and that's a great goddamn question. The narrative is broken up into 3 main chunks, and there's scenes where you speak to an informant at a bar, a detective while being interrogated, and there's scenes where you seem to be slowly losing the ability to eat Doritos without getting it all over your face. Now I think I read somewhere that the developers were based in some Nordic country, so I don't want to be too harsh on their English, but the dialogue is pretty stilted, and it feels as though it took a pass or two through some translation software. I mean, who knows, maybe it's just a bunch of Swedish guys trying to write broken English dialogue as if it's being spoken by Chinese people. It's not as bad as Deus Ex, at least.
Mr. J.C. Denton, in the fresh.
The story essentially boils down to this. Triads killed some people that you love, you hate the Triads now, and you want to kill them all. That's it. Now there are some other cliches going on here, like the Tarantino-esque starting from the end and then flashing back to the past. I'm really not sure why they chose to do this. There aren't many twists and turns to be had. In fact, there aren't any. Worse still is that it seems as though they made a few leftover cinematics for the trailer and just decided to slap them in between levels. It honestly just ends up feeling confusing because nothing that happens in these cinematics really seems tied into what you're actually doing in the events of the game. I'd like to say that this gives them enough of an excuse to go and kill countless bad guys, but I'm again forced to think back to Hotline Miami. While the original Hotline Miami didn't have a huge production for its story, it lured you in with a few mysteries and surprises that kept you wanting to play more. This really offered the player a reprieve from the intensity of Hotline's levels while also giving the player motivation to push into the next level. In Hong Kong Massacre though, nothing really happens from start to finish. You don't learn anything new or revelatory, the introduction does absolutely nothing to establish who you are, who you're killing, or why you should even care. You go to a place, you kill some guys, and you do it again in the next level. Now look, I'm not someone who needs Metal Gear Solid levels of lore or intrigue, but it would be nice if there was something to actually give a shit about. The real moment when I realized that a Hong Kong Massacre story had a problem on its hands was when it loaded up some new level and without any context decided I was in a boss battle against some guy named Wei's Chow. Who's Wei's Chow, you might be asking? I don't fucking know, because despite peppering in these cutscenes after every other mission to pad out the length of the game, they didn't really seem to think that it was important to tell me who the fuck this guy was. So I hear you, you might be screaming at me right now that this is just not the type of game that you should care about the story, that it's all about the gameplay. And that's honestly fair enough, but that means that Hong Kong Massacre's gameplay really needs to be top-notch to compensate for the lack of, pretty much everything else. Well, it isn't. It's fun to fly through the air and shoot guns in slow motion for the first 20 minutes, but unless you're a Flash game, there really needs to be more complexity. Even something as simple as killing the last enemy is cool in principle, but gets downright farcical by the end. First time that you complete a level and kill that last enemy, you realize that the game goes into slow motion and smears Vaseline all over the screen for a somewhat cool looking effect. Well, get used to this because it happens without fail each and every time you beat a level. I don't know why this is in the game. It's not like I have a reason to hate these enemies. I have no catharsis from watching them bleed apart from knowing that the level is over. Okay, so I imagine people think that I'm just unfairly shitting on this game, but consider this. There are 3 enemy types in this game. That's it, 3 enemy types. And that's me being generous because I'm considering some guy in a white trench coat that sometimes flips to be a unique enemy. Now to be completely transparent, the enemy types are as follows. Guy in white trench coat that does flips, I mean we already got that one. Random goons that crave buckshot more than Kurt Cobain, it's a little dark. And guys who wear bulletproof vests that take 1 extra shot to kill. Riveting. Similar to how shooting guns in slow motion can get boring after the first few minutes, killing the same 3 bad guys can get just as tedious. And the level design doesn't really help with this situation either, as the game tries to ramp up difficulty by simply populating every map with just more enemies. I mean, Jesus, I know China's overpopulated, but it feels like babies are being born with a gun in their hand and placed into these levels. Now, Hotline Miami's sequel did this too, and it was honestly the one thing that I really hated about that game. With the twitch shooter where the player needs to be focused the entire time, it gets really exhausting jiggle-peeking corridors for levels that last way too long. This gets worse when you just get impatient because you want to reach the end of the level, only for that impatience to get you killed and reset you all the way back to the start. And if facing off against the same 3 bad guys doesn't make you want to watch paint dry, just wait until you get to your first boss battle. Like I said before, there's usually little or no context provided on why we want to kill this guy, or more importantly, why he's able to take more bullets than 50 Cent. It honestly feels like the developer is playing some kind of cruel joke on me, because you can only do a set amount of damage per cycle. Okay, so watch this. As soon as I shoot this guy, he's going to stagger, which gives him invincibility frames, which then lets him get behind cover before I can shoot him again. It seems like they literally designed the boss battles in this game in such an obtuse way that they wanted players to get frustrated and killed. Like they knew the length of the game was going to be too short and they needed something to kill the player enough just to make sure that the game lasted a full 4 hours. That's not exaggeration, this game is 4 hours long. Now you might be thinking, that's okay, I'll go back and just do the challenges. Well, fuck you, man. The challenges are the same each level. Beat the level in a certain time, beat it without using slow motion, beat it without missing a shot, and beat my dick with a wrench. This game cost me $20. Now, credit where credit's due, there is one improvement that I'm glad Kong Massacre added to the formula, which is a red indicator on the ground that indicates where enemies are located. This means that you don't have to slowly inch forward for fear of getting shot by a surprise off-screen enemy. This is something that honestly happened to me a ton when I played Hotline Miami. And this is a genuinely positive change. Or would be if there wasn't one problem. They made the indicator red, in a game that uses red everywhere. Now, I feel like I've been incredibly critical about a game that was developed by 2 guys that are obviously very passionate about the source material, and honestly, I can see the appeal of this game if you just watched John Wick and wanted to feel like a badass while you were listening to your music. But even if you're someone that loved Hotline Miami, I'd just wait a month or 2, because I guarantee this game's gonna go half price during a sale. It's not necessarily a bad game, I just think that we've been spoiled with Hotline Miami, and unfortunately this game just doesn't compare. Its gameplay is less fluid, the music is bland and extremely limited, and you don't get the same level of complexity that the different masks offered in Hotline Miami. The story might be reminiscent of a Hong Kong action film, but it's so threadbare that it might as well be naked. If the goal was to produce 5 seconds of fun that really emulated the same look and feel of a hard-boiled, they succeeded. It's just too bad that that's really the only thing that they did succeed at. So that's going to do it for the Hong Kong Massacre review. If you feel like I might have gotten it wrong, feel free to let me know in the comments section below. I'm always down to have an open discussion as long as it remains constructive. I will say that while I was actually making this review, the developer patched in custom controls, which is always a plus. The channel itself is actually getting out there a lot more since I've begun posting more frequently, but most of the praise should really be placed on you guys for spreading the videos around and just liking them. I have some ideas kicking around in my head for some future reviews, but I've also put up a straw poll in the description below. As always, if you liked this video, clicking that thumbs button below really helps other people find me. To be completely transparent, the more the channel grows, the more time I can actually dedicate to making new videos. Anyways, thanks again. Hope you guys had a warmer January than I did here in Canada. It was just terrible.